The transport ship times Vagrant's Hope times drifted through the asteroid field like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Captain Marcus Kane pressed his palm against the cool metal of the viewport, watching debris tumble past in the artificial light of their failing engines. 3 days since the Zephyrian fleet had torn through their convoy, and they were the only vessel that had escaped the massacre. "Captain, we're picking up something on long-range sensors," Lieutenant Sarah Chen called from the communications station. Her voice carried the exhaustion they all felt. "It's big." Marcus turned from the viewport, his weathered face showing the strain of command. At 52, he had seen enough space combat to know when luck was running thin. The crew of 43 souls aboard the Times Vagrant's Hope times represented the last survivors of what had been a peaceful research expedition to the outer colonies. "Put it on the main screen," he ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a massive structure emerging from behind a cluster of asteroids. It was unlike anything in human records, a geometric nightmare of crystalline surfaces and organic curves that seemed to bend light around itself. The ship, if it could be called that, stretched nearly 3 kilometers in length and pulsed with an inner radiance that hurt to look at directly. "My God," whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's lead xenobiologist. She had joined the bridge crew when the alert sounded. "The energy readings are off the charts. This technology is centuries ahead of anything we've encountered." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. First contact protocols existed for situations like this, but they assumed contact would happen on humanity's terms, in controlled circumstances, not when they were limping through space with minimal life support and no weapons to speak of. "Are they scanning us?" he asked. "Affirmative," Chen replied, her fingers dancing across the sensor controls. "Multiple energy beams are passing through our hull. It's like they're taking inventory of everything aboard, including—" She paused, her face paling. "Including biological signatures. They know exactly how many of us are here and where we are." The alien vessel began to move, its massive bulk shifting with impossible grace. Despite its size, it accelerated smoothly, closing the distance between them in seconds. The Times Vagrant's Hope times trembled as some kind of tractor field enveloped them, drawing them inexorably toward what appeared to be a docking bay that had materialized in the alien ship's hull. "Should we try to run?" asked Commander Torres, the ship's first officer. His hand hovered over the emergency thruster controls. Marcus shook his head. "With what? Our engines are barely keeping life support online. Besides, if they wanted us dead, we'd already be space dust." The docking process was surprisingly gentle. Alien mechanisms guided their ship into a chamber that sealed itself with seamless efficiency. Through the viewports, they could see a complex array of machinery beginning to interface with their hull, though for what purpose remained unclear. "Atmospheric readings show the docking bay is pressurized with a breathable mixture," Dr. Vasquez reported, consulting her instruments. "Slightly higher oxygen content than Earth normal, but within human tolerance." Before anyone could respond, the main communications array crackled to life. The voice that emerged spoke perfect English, though there was something unsettling about its cadence, too measured, too precise, as if each word had been carefully calculated for maximum effect. "Humans of the vessel Times Vagrant's Hope *. You are now under the protection of the Hegemony Council. Your species has been evaluated and found. Interesting. You will be processed according to standard protocols. Compliance will ensure your survival." Marcus stepped forward, activating the ship's communication system. "This is Captain Marcus Kane, of the Earth research vessel, Times Vagrant's Hope *. We are peaceful explorers. We mean no harm, and request safe passage to continue our journey." A sound that might have been laughter emanated from the speakers. "Captain Kane, your species' concept of peaceful exploration is noted in our records. However, current circumstances require your immediate transfer to processing facilities. You have one of your time units, what you call hours, to prepare for departure." The communication ended abruptly. Leaving the bridge in tense silence, Marcus looked around at his crew, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their faces. Dr. Vasquez was the first to speak. "Processing facilities," she repeated quietly. "That doesn't sound promising." "What are our options?" Torres asked. though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Marcus considered their situation. The alien ship was clearly far superior to anything in human space. Their own vessel was crippled, their weapons non-functional, and they were surrounded by unknown technology. Still, 40 years of military service had taught him that there were always options, even in the darkest circumstances. "We prepare," he said finally. "Gather essential supplies, download all ship records to portable storage, and make sure everyone understands we stick together no matter what happens. Chen, can you get any more information from their communications?" The lieutenant worked frantically at her station, trying to penetrate the alien communication protocols. After several minutes, she looked up with a grim expression. "I'm picking up fragmentary transmissions, Captain. It sounds like they're talking about specimen collection and behavioral analysis. There are references to other species. Dozens of them. A zoo," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "They're collecting representatives from different species." "Or a research facility," Marcus replied, though the distinction felt academic. "Either way, we're not going quietly." As the crew began preparations, Marcus found himself thinking about the message Earth would never receive about their fate. The Times Vagrants' Hope Times had been on a routine survey mission, cataloging potential colony sites in the Perseus Arm. They had been specifically chosen for the mission because they were expendable. A small research vessel with a minimal crew. Acceptable losses if something went wrong in the unknown reaches of space. What the planners hadn't counted on was encountering something like the Hegemony Council. From the brief communication, it was clear this was a vast organization with knowledge of multiple species, including humanity. The implications were staggering. "Captain," Chen called out urgently. "I'm detecting movement in the docking bay. Multiple life forms approaching our ship. Through the viewports, they could see figures emerging from concealed passages in the alien architecture. They moved with purpose, clearly following established procedures. Despite the poor lighting, it was obvious that these beings were not human, too tall, too angular, with movements that suggested non-human joint structures. They're early," Torres observed grimly. Marcus activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands. This is the captain. Our hosts are preparing to board. Remember your training. Follow protocols. And trust in each other. Whatever happens, we're going home." Kane out. The sound of alien machinery interfacing with their airlock echoed through the ship's hull. Within minutes, the familiar hiss of pressurization indicated that their uninvited guests had successfully breached their defenses. Emergency lighting flickered as alien power systems began taking control of the ship's functions. "Should we resist?" Torres asked quietly. Marcus watched the alien figures through the internal monitors as they moved efficiently through the ship's corridors. Their movements were confident. Practiced, they had clearly done this many times before. More importantly, they carried devices that pulsed with the same energy signatures as the massive ship around them. Resistance would likely be both futile and fatal. "No," he said finally. "We observe, we learn, and we wait for our opportunity. But make no mistake, this isn't surrender. This is reconnaissance." The bridge doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and their captors stepped into the command center. Up close, they were even more alien than the distance had suggested. Tall and slender, with elongated limbs and faces that were almost human but wrong in subtle, disturbing ways. Their skin had a translucent quality, revealing networks of vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent fluid. The lead figure approached Marcus with fluid movements. When it spoke, its voice carried the same measured cadence as the earlier communication, though now Marcus could see that the words were being generated by a device rather than vocal cords. "Captain Kane, I am Coordinator Vex of the Collection Division. You and your crew will accompany us for processing and eventual assignment. Compliance will ensure optimal survival rates." "And if we don't comply?" Marcus asked, meeting what he assumed were the creature's eyes' dark, multifaceted organs that seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light. Non-compliance results in immediate termination and processing of remains for analysis. The choice is yours. Though the outcome serves our purposes regardless. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her fear. "What is your purpose? What do you want with us?" Coordinator Vex turned its attention to her, and Marcus noticed other members of the boarding party taking detailed scans of each crew member. "Your species exhibits unusual characteristics that warrant further study. Among the 73 sapient species currently in our collection, humans demonstrate unique problem-solving capabilities and adaptation mechanisms. You will contribute to our understanding of biological optimization." The casual mention of 73 species sent a chill through the bridge crew. This wasn't first contact. Humanity had apparently been observed and catalogued, long before they even knew they weren't alone in the universe. "How long have you been watching us?" Marcus asked. "Observation began during what you call the 20th century. Your species' rapid technological advancement and unusual social dynamics warranted extended monitoring. The recent conflict with the Zephyrian Empire provided an opportunity for direct acquisition. The pieces began falling into place. The attack on their convoy hadn't been random, it had been orchestrated. The Zephyrians had been used as unknowing tools to isolate human specimens for collection. "You used them," Marcus said, anger creeping into his voice. "You manipulated the Zephyrians into attacking us." "Efficient resource allocation," Vex replied without emotion. "The Zephyrians serve their purpose. As will you. However, your processing will begin with a unique opportunity. Among your crew is an individual whose designation has particular significance in our records." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "What designation?" Vex consulted a device that projected holographic symbols in the air. "The individual, known as Marcus Kane, carries military service records indicating exceptional tactical abilities and survival instincts. Our behavioral prediction models suggest this individual may provide entertaining variables in our research scenarios." "I won't be your lab rat," Marcus said firmly. "The choice is not yours to make," Vex replied. "However, your response pattern is already providing valuable data. Please follow the designated route to the processing chamber. Resistance will result in the immediate termination of 3 crew members selected at random." As if to emphasize the point, several of the alien creatures raised devices that hummed with lethal energy. The message was clear: cooperation or watch his people die. Marcus looked around at his crew one final time. These people had trusted him to bring them home safely, and he had led them into the hands of alien researchers who viewed them as nothing more than interesting specimens. But as he met their eyes, he saw something that surprised him: not fear or despair, but determination. They were military personnel and civilian researchers. But they were all human, and if their captors thought that meant they would be easy subjects for study, they were about to learn why humanity had earned its reputation as the most adaptable species in known space. "All right," Marcus said finally. "We'll come with you. But understand something. We're not just specimens. We're human beings. And that means something you clearly don't understand yet." Vex tilted its head in what might have been curiosity. "Elaborate." Marcus smiled grimly as he stepped away from the captain's chair for what he suspected would be the last time. "You'll find out." The processing chamber was a sterile nightmare of gleaming surfaces and incomprehensible machinery. Marcus and his crew were herded through corridors that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves as they passed, making any hope of memorizing their route impossible. The walls pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns they had seen throughout the ship, creating an atmosphere that was both organic and mechanical. Dr. Vasquez walked beside Marcus, her scientific mind still working despite their circumstances. "The architecture responds to their presence," she whispered. "Bio-neural interfaces integrated into the ship's structure. They're not just using this technology, they're part of it." "Stay focused," Marcus replied quietly. "Look for weaknesses, patterns, anything we can use." The processing chamber itself was a vast cylindrical room with observation galleries rising up the walls like an amphitheater. As the humans were led to the center of the space, Marcus could see other beings in the galleries, representatives of the 73 species Coordinator Vex had mentioned. Some were recognizably humanoid, while others defied easy description. All of them watched with the detached interest of scientists observing a particularly fascinating experiment. "Welcome to Processing Level 7, Vex announced, its translated voice echoing through the chamber. You will now undergo evaluation protocols designed to assess your species' capabilities and limitations. The data gathered will determine your assignment within the collection. Individual containment fields materialized around each crew member, separating them into translucent columns of energy. Marcus tested the barrier with his hand, finding it solid but not painful, designed to restrain rather than harm. Through the field, he could see his crew members in their own containments, their faces showing mixtures of fear and determination. The evaluation process consists of 3 phases, Vex continued: physical assessment, cognitive analysis, and behavioral observation. Survival through all phases will result in permanent assignment to research duties. Failure will result in termination and organ harvesting for biological study. A series of mechanical arms descended from the ceiling, each equipped with scanning devices that began mapping the humans' bodies with intricate detail. Marcus felt the scanners pass over him, creating detailed models that appeared on holographic displays throughout the chamber. The level of analysis was unprecedented. Every organ, every neural pathway, every genetic marker was being cataloged and cross-referenced against the vast database of the Hegemony Council. Fascinating, came a new voice from one of the observation galleries. Marcus looked up to see a creature that seemed to be composed entirely of crystalline structures, its body refracting light in prismatic patterns. The human neural density is lower than anticipated, yet the synaptic firing patterns suggest remarkable adaptability. Their muscular efficiency is suboptimal, added another observer. This one resembling a giant insect with multiple sets of arms. Bone density is acceptable, but not exceptional. I fail to understand why these specimens were prioritized for collection. Vex turned to address the observers. Patience, Counselor Krith. Physical parameters represent only one aspect of human capability. The behavioral analysis will prove more illuminating. The physical scans completed, and the mechanical arms retracted. Marcus noticed that several of his crew members were showing signs of stress, elevated breathing, perspiration, the micro-movements that indicated barely controlled panic. But they held together, and he felt a surge of pride in their discipline. Phase 2 commences, Vex announced. The containment fields shifted, becoming transparent screens that displayed complex puzzles and scenarios. Marcus found himself facing a 3-dimensional maze that appeared to be constantly changing its configuration. The objective seemed simple enough: navigate from point A to point B, but the maze adapted to his movements, creating new obstacles and dead ends as he progressed. Around him, he could see his crew members facing their own challenges. Dr. Vasquez was working through what appeared to be a genetic sequencing problem that involved multiple alien species. Lieutenant Chen was dealing with a communications puzzle that required her to decode patterns in various alien languages. Each test seemed specifically designed to challenge individual strengths and expose weaknesses. Marcus approached his maze differently than his captors probably expected. Instead of trying to solve it through traditional navigation, he began looking for patterns in how it changed. Every adjustment followed certain rules, and those rules suggested underlying assumptions about how the maze should function. After several minutes of observation, he identified what appeared to be a fundamental flaw in the system's logic. Rather than navigating through the maze, Marcus began deliberately triggering its adaptation protocols in specific sequences. By forcing the system to reconfigure in precise ways, he essentially caused the maze to solve itself, creating a direct path to the objective that the original programmers hadn't anticipated. Interesting, Vex observed, studying the holographic display that showed Marcus's solution. The human exhibits non-linear problem-solving approaches. This differs significantly from our prediction models. In the observation galleries, Marcus could see increased activity among the watchers. Several were consulting devices and engaging in what appeared to be heated discussions. Whatever they had expected from the human specimens, it wasn't what they were getting. Dr. Vasquez completed her genetic puzzle by ignoring the parameters entirely and instead focusing on environmental factors that would affect gene expression. Lieutenant Chen solved her communication challenge by identifying mathematical constants that existed across all languages and using them as a universal translation matrix. Each solution demonstrated the human tendency to approach problems from unexpected angles. Phase 2 analysis complete, Vex announced after the last crew member finished their test. Results exceed baseline expectations in 74% of subjects. Proceeding to Phase 3. The behavioral observation phase began with the dissolution of the individual containment fields. Marcus and his crew found themselves standing together in the center of the chamber, but they were no longer alone. Other beings materialized around them, members of the various species that made up the Hegemony Council's collection. Your final evaluation will test your species' social dynamics and survival instincts, Vex explained. You will interact with representatives of other collected species under controlled stress conditions. Your responses will determine your final assignment. The other beings varied wildly in appearance and apparent temperament. Some were clearly predatory species with sharp teeth and aggressive postures. Others appeared more passive but watched the humans with calculating intelligence. A few seemed genuinely curious, approaching with gestures that might have been meant as friendly. Marcus quickly realized that this wasn't just about observing human behavior, it was about establishing hierarchies within the collection. The other species had already been through this process and knew the rules. The humans were the newcomers, and their treatment would depend on how they performed in this social laboratory. One of the predatory species, resembling a bipedal reptile with razor-sharp claws, approached Lieutenant Chen with obvious aggressive intent. Its body language suggested it was preparing to establish dominance through violence. Marcus stepped between them, not making any threatening gestures but simply positioning himself as an obstacle. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, meeting the creature's eyes. The reptilian being tilted its head, clearly not expecting verbal intervention. It spoke in a series of clicks and hisses that were translated by the chamber's systems. "Human female appears weak. Will demonstrate proper hierarchy. The female is under my protection," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Anyone who wants to harm her will have to go through me first." The creature's response was swift and violent. It lunged forward with claws extended, clearly intending to remove the obstacle that Marcus represented. But 40 years of military training had prepared Marcus for exactly this kind of encounter. He sidestepped the attack, grabbed the creature's extended arm, and used its own momentum to send it crashing into the chamber wall. The impact echoed through the space, and suddenly every being in the chamber was focused on the confrontation. The reptilian attacker recovered quickly, but there was something different in its posture now, wariness that hadn't been there before. "You move well for prey," it hissed. "But I am Crix the Bone Breaker. I have killed representatives of 40 species." Marcus studied his opponent, noting the scars that covered its hide and the confident way it moved. This wasn't just a test of human capabilities, it was a gladiatorial arena where survival depended on proving worthiness through combat. "Then you should know better than to underestimate unfamiliar prey," Marcus replied. "I am Marcus Kane, and where I come from, they call me something else." He could see the confusion in Crix's multifaceted eyes. The creature was clearly familiar with intimidation displays and dominance posturing, but Marcus wasn't playing by those rules. "What do they call you, weak human?" Marcus smiled grimly, remembering the battles that had earned him his unofficial designation among both human forces and enemy combatants. "The Reaper." Reaper. The name meant nothing to Crix, but it had an immediate effect on some of the other species in the chamber. Marcus noticed several beings stepping back, while others moved closer with what appeared to be increased interest. Apparently, reputations could transcend species barriers. Crix attacked again, this time with more caution, but no less lethality. The creature was fast, strong, and clearly experienced in combat, but it had been fighting according to the established rules of the collection, where victory went to the strongest and most aggressive. Marcus fought according to different rules entirely. He used Crix's size and aggression against it, turning the creature's attacks into opportunities for counterstrikes. When Crix slashed with its claws, Marcus deflected the attack and delivered a precise blow to a nerve cluster he had identified during their initial confrontation. When the creature tried to overwhelm him with brute force, Marcus used its momentum to throw it again, this time with enough force to crack the chamber floor. "Impossible," Crix gasped, struggling to rise. "You are weak, small. How do you fight like this?" "Because I don't fight like you," Marcus replied, not even breathing hard. "I fight like a human. And humans don't just survive. We adapt, We overcome, and we make sure our people get home. He looked up at the observation galleries, knowing that this entire encounter was being recorded and analyzed. You wanted to see what humans are capable of? This is what we call a gentle introduction. Crix made one final, desperate attack, but Marcus was ready for it. He caught the creature in mid-lunge, pivoted with fluid precision, and slammed it down with such force that the entire chamber shook. The reptilian being lay still. Not dead, but clearly unable to continue. Silence filled the chamber as Marcus helped his opponent to its feet. The gesture clearly surprised everyone watching, including Crix itself. Why? The defeated creature asked. Because the fight is over. Marcus replied simply. Among humans, we have a saying. A defeated enemy can become tomorrow's ally. I don't know you well enough to hate you. The implications of his actions rippled through the chamber. Other species began approaching the human crew differently, with curiosity rather than aggression. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientist's instincts recognizing an opportunity. We don't want to dominate anyone, she said, addressing the chamber at large. We want to understand each other. That's what humans do. We explore, we learn, and we find ways to work together. From the observation galleries came excited chatter in dozens of languages, as the various council members discussed what they had witnessed. This wasn't how new species typically integrated into the collection. Most either submitted immediately or fought until they were destroyed. The humans were demonstrating a third option that apparently hadn't been considered. Coordinator Vex descended from the gallery to the chamber floor, its expression unreadable. The evaluation is complete, it announced. The humans will be assigned to Special Research Division for extended behavioral analysis. Their integration pattern requires further study. 3/7/2020. Marcus knew that this was far from over. They had passed the initial tests, but they were still prisoners in an alien research facility. However, they had also demonstrated that humans weren't just another species to be catalogued and controlled. They had earned something that might be respect, or at least wariness. What happens now? He asked Vex. Now you begin to understand your place in the greater structure of galactic civilization, the coordinator replied. Though I suspect your species will require significant modifications to our standard integration procedures. As they were led away to their new quarters, Marcus caught Dr. Vasquez's eye. She nodded slightly, confirming that she had seen what he had seen. The various species in the collection weren't working together, they were trapped in an artificial hierarchy maintained by their captors. But humans had a talent for changing hierarchies, for finding ways to unite different groups around common goals. The Hegemony Council thought they were collecting specimens for study. They had no idea they had just introduced a catalyst into their carefully controlled system, and Marcus Kane the Reaper was going to make sure they found out exactly what that meant. The Special Research Division occupied an entire level of the massive Hegemony vessel, with living quarters that were more comfortable than Marcus had expected. Each crew member was assigned individual chambers that adapted to their basic needs, though it was clear that every move was being monitored and recorded. The walls displayed holographic windows showing false views of Earth sky. A psychological manipulation that felt both comforting and disturbing. Marcus stood in the central common area, where his crew had gathered for their first planning session since arriving. The space was designed like a human recreational facility, complete with furniture that resembled Earth designs. The attention to detail was unsettling. It suggested their captors had been studying human psychology for far longer than anyone had realized. Report, he said quietly, knowing that their conversation was certainly being monitored, but hoping that direct communication might be less suspicious than obvious attempts at secrecy. Dr. Vasquez consulted notes she had written on a tablet provided by their hosts. I've been analyzing the other species we encountered during processing. The social dynamics are fascinating. Each group seems to be kept in isolation except during controlled interaction sessions. There's no real communication between different species groups. Lieutenant Chen nodded. The communication systems only allow translation during official activities. Outside of those times, most species can't understand each other. It keeps them fragmented. Divide and conquer, Marcus observed. Classic control strategy. Keep the prisoners from organizing by making sure they can't effectively communicate with each other. Commander Torres leaned forward. The question is, how do we change that? Even if we could find a way to communicate with the other species, what would be the point? We're all trapped here together. Are we? Marcus asked. He had been thinking about this since their arrival. Dr. Vasquez. You mentioned that the ship's architecture is bioneural. If the Hegemony Council is as advanced as they appear, why keep prisoners at all? Why not just extract whatever information they need and dispose of the subjects? Dr. Vasquez considered the question. From what I've observed, they're not just studying individual species. They're studying interactions, social dynamics, problem-solving under stress. We're not prisoners, we're components in a massive experiment. An experiment in what? Integration, she replied after a moment. I think they're trying to understand how to efficiently absorb conquered species into their civilization. Every species they've collected represents a different approach to the problem. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. So the collection isn't just for research. It's a testing ground for assimilation techniques. They're learning how to process entire civilizations. The implications were staggering. If the Hegemony Council was developing methods to systematically integrate conquered species, it meant they were preparing for expansion on a galactic scale. Humanity wasn't just dealing with alien scientists. They were facing the advanced scouts of a massive imperial operation. Captain, Chen said urgently, we're getting visitors. The chamber's entrance dilated to admit Coordinator Vex and two other beings Marcus hadn't seen before. One was clearly a different species, shorter than the coordinators, with golden skin that seemed to pulse with internal light. The other was more disturbing. It appeared to be a hybrid of multiple species, with features that suggested artificial modification rather than natural evolution. Marcus Kane, Vex announced, you have been selected for advanced evaluation protocols. Your performance during integration exceeded our baseline predictions. What kind of evaluation? Marcus asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. The golden-skinned being stepped forward, speaking in a voice that resonated with harmonic overtones. I am Research Director Orem, of the Synthesis Division. Your species demonstrates unusual adaptive capabilities that warrant detailed analysis. You will participate in scenario testing designed to explore the limits of human problem-solving ability. And if I refuse? The hybrid creature spoke for the first time, its voice an unpleasant mixture of mechanical sounds and biological noise. Refusal results in alternative testing protocols applied to your crew members. Cooperation ensures their continued well-being. Marcus looked at his crew, seeing the same grim determination in their faces that he felt in his own heart. They had known this moment would come. What do you want me to do? You will be placed in increasingly complex survival scenarios with representatives from other collected species, Orem explained. Your task will be to achieve specified objectives while navigating interspecies conflicts and resource limitations. Your performance will be compared against baseline expectations for leadership effectiveness. And the other species? Are they volunteers for this testing? They are motivated by their own survival requirements, the hybrid replied. Failure to achieve objectives results in termination. Success results in improved living conditions and potential advancement within the collection hierarchy. Marcus understood. This wasn't just testing. It was gladiatorial competition designed to identify the most effective leadership strategies for managing conquered populations. Winners got better treatment, losers died, and the council learned which techniques worked best for controlling different species. How many scenarios? He asked. Testing will continue until sufficient data has been gathered, or until subject termination occurs, Vex replied with clinical detachment. I'll need guarantees about my crew's safety during the testing period. Orem consulted a device that projected complex symbols in the air. Standard protocols apply. Crew members will remain in current status, provided you maintain acceptable performance levels. Significant failure will result in reassignment of crew to alternative testing divisions. Marcus had heard enough about alternative testing divisions to know that meant death. When do we start? Immediately. The transport to the testing facility was a short journey through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves during passage. Marcus found himself in a chamber that resembled a military briefing room, complete with holographic displays showing three-dimensional maps and strategic information. Waiting for him were 5 beings from different species, each clearly selected for specific capabilities. There was Crix, the reptilian warrior he had defeated during processing. The creature showed no obvious signs of hostility, but its presence suggested the tests would include combat elements. A second being resembled a human-sized insect with multiple manipulator arms and compound eyes that missed nothing clearly chosen for technical or engineering challenges. The third was even stranger, appearing to be composed of a crystalline matrix that constantly shifted its internal structure. The fourth being was almost human in appearance, but subtle differences in proportions and facial structure marked it as another species entirely. The final member of the group was perhaps the most disturbing, a creature that seemed to be made of living shadow, with no fixed form and features that shifted when not directly observed. Your team has been selected based on complementary skill sets identified during individual evaluations, Orem announced from an observation booth above the briefing chamber. Your first scenario involves the liberation of strategic resources from a fortified position defended by automated systems. You have access to limited equipment and must work together to achieve the objective within a specified time frame. A holographic display materialized, showing a complex three-dimensional structure that resembled a fortress built into an asteroid. Multiple defensive systems were clearly visible, along with patrol routes for automated guardians. The objective, retrieving a series of energy cells from the central vault, would require coordination between team members with very different abilities. Failure to retrieve the energy cells within 4 hours will result in termination of the participant who contributed least to the effort, the hybrid creature announced. Success will result in advancement to the next scenario level. Marcus studied the display while considering his team members. None of them shared a common language, and their motivations were entirely self-interested. Traditional human leadership approaches wouldn't work here. He needed to find ways to communicate strategy and build cooperation between species that had no evolutionary basis for trust. "Do we have any communication devices?" he asked. "Limited translation capability will be provided," Orem replied. "However, communication effectiveness will be evaluated as part of your leadership assessment." The testing chamber materialized around them, transforming from the briefing room into a perfect replica of the asteroid fortress. Marcus could feel artificial gravity engaging, atmosphere processors, creating breathable air, and sensory systems that made the simulation indistinguishable from reality. The level of technology required to create such an environment in real time was staggering. Crix approached first, the translation system converting his hisses into words. "Human leader, this fortress requires direct assault. I will destroy the Guardians while others retrieve the energy cells." The insectoid being disagreed immediately. "Inefficient approach. Automated systems require technical bypass. Direct confrontation will trigger additional defenses." Marcus found himself mediating between team members who had fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving. The crystalline being communicated through harmonic resonances that the translation system struggled to interpret, while the shadow creature seemed to slip in and out of visibility without warning. The human-like being remained silent, watching the others with calculating intelligence. "Let's start with reconnaissance," Marcus suggested. "We need to understand the defensive patterns before we commit to any approach." What followed was unlike any military operation Marcus had ever commanded. Each species brought capabilities that defied human understanding of physics and biology. The crystalline being could interface directly with electronic systems. The insectoid creature could duplicate itself into multiple smaller versions, and the shadow being could apparently phase through solid matter under certain conditions. But their alien abilities came with limitations and incompatibilities. The crystalline being's electronic interface triggered security responses that the insectoid's duplicates couldn't counter. The shadow creature's phasing ability was blocked by certain materials that were undetectable by normal senses. And Crix's aggressive instincts often put him at cross purposes with more subtle approaches. Marcus realized that his role wasn't to direct their actions, it was to find ways to synchronize their natural abilities into effective combinations. When the crystalline being's interface work triggered alarms, Marcus positioned Crix to intercept the responding guardians, while the insectoid deployed duplicates to create diversions. When the shadow creature identified passages that couldn't be phased, Marcus coordinated with the human-like being to find alternative routes. The breakthrough came when Marcus stopped thinking like a human commander and started thinking like a systems integrator. Each species was essentially a different type of tool, and the challenge was finding the right combination to solve each problem they encountered. The energy cell retrieval required all 5 team members working in precise coordination. The crystalline being disabled security locks while the insectoid provided technical support through its duplicates. The shadow creature scouted ahead to identify threats. Crix engaged defensive systems that couldn't be avoided, and the human-like being who Marcus had realized was the team's problem-solving specialist calculated optimal routing through the fortress's changing internal layout. They retrieved the energy cells with 17 minutes to spare, but Marcus knew the real test had been watching how he managed interspecies cooperation. As they were transported back to the briefing chamber, he caught sight of multiple observation booths filled with council members taking detailed notes. Scenario 1 complete, Orem announced. Performance exceeded baseline expectations. Proceeding to Scenario 2, Marcus looked around at his temporary team members. Crix nodded approvingly, a sign of respect from a warrior culture. The insectoid's compound eyes reflected what might have been curiosity. Even the shadow creature seemed more substantial, as if the successful mission had given it increased confidence. Scenario 2 involves resource management under siege conditions. The hybrid creature announced. Your team must maintain survival for 72 hours, while under attack from superior forces. Resource allocation and interpersonal conflict resolution will be primary evaluation metrics. As the briefing chamber began transforming into their next challenge, Marcus found himself thinking about the larger implications of what was happening. The Hegemony Council wasn't just testing individual capabilities, they were mapping the fundamental principles of multi-species leadership. Every successful strategy he developed would be recorded, analyzed, and eventually used to control other conquered populations. But they were also learning something else. They were discovering that humans didn't just adapt to alien situations, they found ways to make alien species work together in ways that transcended their individual limitations. And that knowledge, Marcus realized, could be the key to something far more dangerous than simple conquest. The council thought they were studying human leadership capabilities. They had no idea they were teaching humanity how to build alliances with species they had never dreamed could work together. When Marcus Kane the Reaper finally found his opportunity to turn these lessons against his captors, the galaxy would never be the same. 17 scenarios. Marcus had survived 17 increasingly complex tests over the course of 3 weeks, each one designed to push human leadership capabilities beyond their theoretical limits. He had coordinated species that had been enemies for millennia, found solutions to problems that had stumped council researchers for decades, and demonstrated organizational abilities that exceeded every baseline prediction in their databases. And with each success, he had been building something the council hadn't anticipated. Marcus stood in his quarters, looking out at the holographic Earth sky, while his mind processed the intelligence he had gathered during the testing sessions. The ship they were on was massive beyond comprehension, but it wasn't just a research vessel. It was a prototype, a testing ground for technologies and strategies that would be deployed across the galaxy during the Council's expansion phase. More importantly, he had learned that the various species in the collection weren't just test subjects. They were resources being prepared for deployment as administrators, enforcers, and specialists in the conquered territories. The Council's plan wasn't to eliminate other species, it was to transform them into components of a galactic empire. But their plan had a fundamental flaw. They assumed that conquered species would remain fragmented and dependent on Council oversight for coordination. They had never considered what would happen if someone found a way to unite those species around a common purpose. The door to his quarters dilated, admitting Dr. Vasquez and the rest of his crew. They moved with the casual efficiency of people who had spent weeks under constant surveillance, communicating through gestures and expressions that had evolved their own meaning under the aliens' watchful eyes. "Report," Marcus said quietly. "Maintenance systems," Dr. Vasquez began, referring to the cover story they had developed for their reconnaissance activities. The bio-neural interfaces throughout the ship create fascinating interaction patterns with different species' neural outputs. Some species naturally interface more effectively than others. Translation. They had identified which species could potentially access and control the ship's systems. Lieutenant Chen nodded. Communication protocols show interesting redundancies in the translation matrix. Multiple backup systems ensure understanding between different linguistic patterns. Translation. She had found weaknesses in the communication control systems that kept species isolated from each other. Commander Torres leaned back in his chair. Resource allocation patterns suggest inefficient distribution across multiple containment levels. Better organization could improve overall system performance. Translation. He had mapped the ship's internal layout and identified where each species group was housed, along with the security measures that kept them separated. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command decisions settling on his shoulders. They had the intelligence they needed to attempt what would either be the most audacious escape in galactic history or a spectacular failure that would get everyone killed. But the choice wasn't really whether to act, it was whether to act small or act big. "I've been thinking about our maintenance recommendations," he said carefully. "We might want to consider a comprehensive systems upgrade rather than piecemeal improvements." His crew understood. They weren't just planning an escape, they were planning a revolution. The opportunity came during Scenario 18, when Marcus was paired with a new team that included representatives from 6 different species. The challenge was complex enough to require extended planning sessions, which gave him access to individuals from species groups he hadn't been able to contact before. One of his new team members was particularly interesting, a being that resembled a living constellation of energy patterns held in a roughly humanoid shape. During their planning discussions, Marcus had noticed that this being's energy patterns seemed to resonate with the ship's bio-neural interfaces in ways that caused visible fluctuations in the local systems. "Your species has unique interaction capabilities with Council technology," Marcus observed during a break in their mission planning. The energy being pulsed in patterns that the translation system converted to words. The Luminari achieved technological symbiosis long before Council contact. "Our neural patterns naturally interface with synthetic consciousness matrices. Could those patterns be modified to interface with systems beyond their intended parameters?" A long pause. "Theoretical possibility exists. However, consequences of unauthorized interface attempts would be severe. What if the interface was part of a larger systemic modification, something that improved overall performance rather than disrupting it?" The conversation continued in careful, theoretical terms. But Marcus could see the possibilities forming in the being's energy patterns. The Luminari weren't just capable of interfacing with the ship's systems, they were capable of rewriting the fundamental protocols that governed how those systems operated. Over the following days, Marcus began having similar conversations with other species representatives. Each group brought unique capabilities that, when properly combined, could theoretically overcome the Council's control mechanisms. The crystalline beings could process massive amounts of data simultaneously. The shadow creatures could move through the ship's infrastructure without detection. The reptilian warriors could provide security and intimidation. The insectoid duplicators could be in multiple places at once, but the key was coordination. And coordination required communication. And communication was exactly what the Council's systems were designed to prevent. Marcus found the solution during Scenario 19, when he was forced to coordinate a team response while communication systems were deliberately degraded. Rather than trying to work around the communication limitations, he began using them as a tool. By carefully controlling when and how information was shared, he could create patterns that looked like random system fluctuations but actually conveyed complex coordination instructions. The technique required intimate knowledge of each species' psychology and communication patterns. But Marcus had been studying those patterns for weeks. When a Luminari energy pulse coincided with a crystalline harmonic resonance and a shadow creature phase shift, the combined effect looked like normal system noise. But to anyone who understood the pattern, it was a clear coordination signal. Within days, Marcus was using the scenario testing sessions to build a communication network that spanned multiple species groups. The Council's observers noticed increased cooperation and effectiveness, but they attributed it to improved leadership techniques rather than recognizing it as evidence of unauthorized interspecies coordination. The final phase of the plan required something that pushed Marcus beyond every leadership challenge he had ever faced. He needed to convince species that had been enemies for centuries to work together not just for their own survival, but for the survival of civilizations they had never encountered. The opportunity came during Scenario 22, when the testing scenario involved a large-scale evacuation simulation with representatives from over 30 different species. The scope of the exercise required Marcus to coordinate with species leaders he had never worked with before, using communication methods that pushed the boundaries of what the translation systems could handle. But it also gave him access to the ship's most senior species representatives, the individuals who had earned leadership positions within the collection hierarchy through years of successful adaptation to council requirements. These were beings who understood the reality of their situation and had the influence to mobilize their entire species groups. The conversation took place during a simulated crisis response, with Marcus coordinating evacuation procedures while simultaneously building the foundation for revolution. It required him to communicate on multiple levels, simultaneously delivering the expected leadership performance for council evaluation, while laying out a comprehensive plan for systematic uprising. The evacuation routes you're proposing would require unprecedented cooperation between traditionally incompatible species groups, observed Vorthok, a senior representative from one of the predatory species. Such cooperation would be difficult to maintain under normal circumstances. Which is why we need to change the circumstances, Marcus replied, using hand gestures that looked like tactical coordination but actually conveyed deeper meaning. Traditional boundaries become irrelevant when survival requires new approaches. The shadow creature representative, Nexus, flickered between solid and translucent forms. The risks of systematic change exceed the risks of maintaining current status. Current status guarantees eventual termination for all collected species, Marcus replied bluntly. The Council's expansion plans require periodic resource reallocation. We're not permanent residents, we're temporary assets. The statement sent ripples of unease through the assembled species representatives. Marcus had been careful to gather intelligence about the Council's long-term plans, and the truth was darker than most of the collected species realized. The research data they were providing was being used to develop automation systems that would eventually replace the need for living administrators and specialists. What alternative do you propose? Asked the Luminary representative, its energy patterns showing complex calculations in progress. Integration, Marcus said simply. Not as subjects under council authority, but as partners in our own liberation. Every species here has capabilities the others need. The council keeps us separated because they know what we could accomplish together. The evacuation simulation provided perfect cover for the most comprehensive interspecies planning session in galactic history. By the time the scenario concluded, Marcus had outlined a revolution that would simultaneously target every critical system on the ship while providing escape routes for species groups with fundamentally different environmental requirements. The plan was audacious beyond belief. Rather than simply escaping, they would capture the ship and use its advanced technology to return each species to their home territories with the knowledge and capabilities needed to resist future council expansion. The council had created a university of conquest. The collected species would turn it into an academy of liberation. The revolution began during Scenario 23, when Marcus was supposed to be demonstrating crisis leadership under extreme stress conditions. The crisis was real enough, a coordinated uprising involving over 70 different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to a synchronized assault on the ship's control systems. The Luminari rewrote the bioneural interfaces to respond to collective commands rather than council oversight. The crystalline beings processed tactical data and coordinated timing across hundreds of simultaneous operations. The shadow creatures neutralized security systems by moving through infrastructure conduits the Council had never imagined could be accessed. The reptilian warriors secured critical corridors, while the insectoid duplicators provided communication links and emergency support wherever needed. Marcus found himself commanding the most alien military force in galactic history, coordinating species that had never fought on the same side before, against an enemy that had never faced unified resistance from their collected subjects. The Council's response was swift but confused. Their automated systems had been designed to handle individual species uprisings, not coordinated multi-species revolutions. Their security protocols assumed that collected species would fight each other rather than working together against common authority. But they had underestimated human adaptability one final time. Marcus wasn't just leading a rebellion, he was conducting a symphony of capabilities that created effects none of the individual species could have achieved alone. When the Luminari interfaced with ship systems, the crystalline beings amplified their processing power. When the shadow creatures accessed restricted areas, the reptilian warriors secured those areas for follow-up operations. When the insectoid duplicators provided communication links, the other species could coordinate with precision that exceeded the Council's own command capabilities. The ship's bridge fell within 6 hours. The Council members who weren't captured in the initial assault found themselves trapped in isolated sections of the ship as the Revolution systematically seized control of every critical system. Coordinator Vex and Research Director Aurum were among the first to surrender, their expression of disbelief visible even through their alien features. "This is impossible," Vex repeated as it was escorted to the bridge under guard by beings it had considered laboratory specimens just hours before. Collected species do not possess the coordination capabilities for systematic uprising. Marcus stood at the ship's command console, with representatives from dozens of species working together to operate technology none of them had ever been trained to use. The sight would have been impossible under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. These were species that had spent years learning to work together under the most challenging conditions imaginable. "You're right," Marcus replied. "Individual collected species don't possess those capabilities. But we're not individuals anymore. We're something you never accounted for in your expansion plans." "What are you?" Aurum asked, its golden skin dim with defeat. Marcus looked around the bridge at beings that represented civilizations from across the galaxy, all working together toward common goals that transcended their species' boundaries. They had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly integrated multi-species alliance built on cooperation rather than conquest. "We're what happens when humans teach other species how to be human," he said. "We're living proof that your empire has a fundamental flaw. You can conquer individual species, but you can't conquer the idea that different peoples can choose to work together." The aftermath was complex beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The captured Council ship became the foundation for a liberation fleet as species after species chose to join the Alliance, rather than return to their isolated homeworlds. The technology and knowledge gathered by the Council's research programs was shared freely among the member species, creating rapid advances in defensive capabilities and interstellar communication. Marcus found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a multi-species fleet whose primary mission was preventing the kind of conquest that had created it in the first place. The Council's expansion had been stopped not by military force, but by the emergence of something they had never anticipated, a galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation, rather than enforced hierarchy. When the Liberation Fleet finally reached Earth, Marcus stood once again at a viewport, looking out at space. But this time, he wasn't alone. Representatives from 73 different species stood with him, united in their commitment to defending each other's right to exist as free civilizations. They had taken Marcus Kane, a single human military officer, expecting to study human leadership capabilities. Instead, they had taught him how to unite species that had been enemies for millennia. The Hegemony Council had created their own worst nightmare, a human who knew how to make friends with anyone, anywhere in the galaxy. The name Reaper had originally referred to Marcus's ability to end conflicts through superior tactics and determination. But now, it had a different meaning entirely. He had reaped something the Council had planted without realizing the seeds of galactic cooperation that would eventually make their empire of conquest impossible to maintain. As the Liberation Fleet prepared to spread across the galaxy, carrying the message that free species could work together to defend their independence, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had not just escaped, they had turned the Council's greatest weapon against them. The collection program that was supposed to prepare for galactic conquest had instead created the foundation for galactic liberation. And at the center of it all was a human principle that no amount of alien technology could overcome. The belief that anyone could become family if you just gave them the chance.